The hospital at night was supposed to be quiet, a place where lives were monitored by beeping machines and whispered prayers. Instead, it shook with the sound of metal tearing apart. The ward doors buckled under force. Armed men poured in boots, pounding tile rifles, sweeping white walls now stained with panic. Patients screamed. Doctors froze. Somewhere an alarm wailed like it knew no one was coming in time. And in the middle of that chaos stood a night nurse. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She adjusted her stance by half a step. Eyes steady, breathing slow, the kind of calm that didn't belong in a hospital hallway. One of the gunmen laughed when he saw her. Another dismissed her with a wave of his rifle. They had no idea that every exit, every shadow, every mistake they were about to make had already been calculated. Because before she ever wore scrubs, she trained soldiers how to survive hell. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're drawn to stories where silence hides strength, don't forget to subscribe. The night shift at Street Eliza Medical Center always carried a different kind of weight. During the day, the hospital was loud with movement, stretchers rolling, phones ringing, voices overlapping. At night, everything slowed. Sounds traveled farther. Decisions felt heavier. And mistakes had nowhere to hide. The fluorescent lights above the third-floor ward hummed softly as Emily Carter checked a patient's IV line. Her movements were efficient, almost economical. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She scanned vitals, noted the heart rate, adjusted the drip by a fraction of a turn, and moved on. To most of the staff, Emily was forgettable in the safest way possible. She worked nights. She didn't gossip. She didn't complain. She volunteered for extra shifts without being asked, and declined invitations without explanation. Her brown hair was always tied back. Her scrubs were spotless. Her badge read "Registered Nurse, Nothing More." "Carter, you're good here," Dr. Nolan Reed asked from the nurse's station, eyes already half on a chart. Emily glanced up. "Vitals are stable. Room 317 might need pain reassessment in 20. Reed nodded already, moving on. That was how it always went. People spoke around her, not to her. She existed as part of the hospital's background, noise, useful, reliable, unremarkable, and that was exactly how Emily wanted it. She paused at the end of the hall, listening, not because she heard something wrong, because she heard something different. The air felt off. A subtle pressure change like before a storm, the kind you didn't notice unless you'd been trained to. Emily forced herself to relax her shoulders. "You're not there anymore," she reminded herself. "This is a hospital, not a training ground." Still, she adjusted her position instinctively, stepping closer to the wall instead of the center of the hallway. She checked the reflection in the glass of a supply cabinet, angles, blind spots, distances measured unconsciously in feet and seconds. A memory flickered before she could stop it. Red dirt. The heat, pressing down like a hand on the back of her neck. A line of exhausted soldiers waiting for instructions. Her voice steady and unforgiving, cutting through fatigue. Again, "You fail here, you don't fail alone." Emily swallowed and returned to the present. At the nurse's station, two younger nurses whispered urgently. "Did you hear about the new admit in 3B?" one asked. The one from the highway transfer, the other replied. "Yeah, security's been hovering all night." Emily pretended to update a chart, listening, without looking. "They say he's tied to some federal case," the first nurse continued. "Protected witness or something. Why would they bring him here? Because this place is quiet," the second said. Too quiet. Emily's pen paused. She knew that kind of patient. The kind that didn't belong in a civilian ward. The kind that brought trouble whether they wanted to or not. A security officer walked past, hand resting too close to his holster. His eyes flicked down the hall, then back again. Not relaxed. Not routine. Emily catalogued it all without meaning to. Extra security, a high-value patient, night shift, reduced staff, textbook vulnerability. She exhaled slowly through her nose. "You okay?" asked Sarah Mitchell, another nurse, noticing Emily standing still. Emily nodded. "Just thinking about bed." Sarah laughed. "Yeah, right. You're always thinking." Emily smiled faintly but said nothing. She made her way toward Ward 3B, pushing a medication cart. As she approached, she caught sight of the patient through the partially open door, A middle-aged man, pale, bruised, with a hospital wristband that had been double-checked and triple-locked. 2 security cameras covered the hallway. A third had been repositioned recently, its angle slightly off. Emily stopped the cart. That camera angle bothered her. She reached up, pretending to adjust a wall-mounted sanitizer dispenser, and glanced again. The lens didn't cover the far left approach. A narrow slice of blind space no more than 3 feet wide. Enough for one person to disappear. Her heart rate didn't spike. It flattened. This wasn't fear. It was recognition. She turned the cart around and wheeled it back toward the nurse's station, her mind already running through contingencies she hadn't used in years. If something happens, they'll come fast, she thought. Loud, overconfident. Her fingers curled once, then relaxed. She caught her reflection in a darkened monitor screen. The face looking back was calm, almost tired. No one would look at her and see danger, or leadership, or violence. That anonymity had cost her friendships. It had cost her promotions. It had cost her explanations she'd never given. But it had kept her invisible, and invisible was safe. The overhead lights flickered for just a second. Emily's eyes lifted immediately. "Did you see that?" someone asked. "It's an old building," Dr. Reed replied. "Relax." Emily didn't relax. She felt it then, a distant vibration underfoot, so faint no one else noticed. Not footsteps, not machinery, something heavier. She glanced at the wall clock. 2:17 a. The hour when help was thinnest, when exhaustion dulled instincts, when mistakes were easiest to force. She leaned closer to Sarah. "If anything happens," Emily said quietly, "get patients into rooms and lock the doors. Don't argue, just do it." Sarah frowned. "What are you talking about?" Emily met her eyes just for a moment. "Trust me." Before Sarah could respond, a sharp metallic crack echoed from somewhere below. The sound wasn't loud enough to trigger alarms. Not yet. But Emily knew that sound. It was the sound of a door being breached the wrong way. Her jaw tightened as she pushed the cart aside and stepped into the hallway, positioning herself where she could see both exits. No one noticed her change. No one realized that the quiet night nurse had already shifted into something else entirely. The second sound came 30 seconds later. This one was clearer, sharper, metal against metal. Then a dull thud followed by silence that didn't belong in a hospital. Emily Carter didn't move at first. She didn't rush. She didn't warn anyone out loud. Panic spread faster than truth ever could, and noise was a liability. She counted instead. 1, 2, 3. At 4, the vibration traveled up through the soles of her shoes, again closer this time. Deliberate. Heavy weight distributed carefully, like people who knew how to move without announcing themselves. "They're inside." "Emily," Sarah whispered from the nurse's station. "What's going on?" Emily turned just enough to meet her eyes. Her voice stayed low, steady. "Lock the station doors. Now." Sarah hesitated. "We can't just—" "Now," Emily repeated, sharper this time. Something in her tone cut through the confusion. Sarah nodded and reached for the control panel, hands shaking as she sealed the glass doors around the station. Other nurses stared, unsure whether to follow or question. Emily didn't stay to explain. She moved down the hall toward Ward 3B, her steps measured, her posture relaxed in a way that disguised intent. Her mind began stripping the situation down to essentials. Unknown number, likely 4 to 6. Armed, purpose-driven. She glanced at the ceiling. The nearest camera blinked red, still active. She stepped deliberately into the blind spot she'd noticed earlier and paused, listening. Voices. Low, male, controlled. Not frantic, not sloppy. That made them more dangerous. Emily reached into the medication cart she'd left nearby and removed a roll of gauze, winding it quickly around her knuckles, not for padding but for grip. She slipped a penlight into her pocket and loosened the strap of her watch, letting it hang just enough to slide free if needed. None of it looked suspicious. All of it was preparation. A scream echoed from below, cut short almost immediately. Emily's chest tightened, but her breathing remained even. She'd learned a long time ago that emotion came after action, not before. She crept closer to the stairwell door. It was ajar by less than an inch. Emily positioned herself to the side, pressed flat against the wall, and waited. Footsteps approached from below. 2 sets. Heavy boots. The door opened wider. The first man came through with his rifle angled down, scanning. The second followed half a second later, covering the rear. They didn't see her. Emily stepped in behind the second man and drove the edge of her forearm into the base of his skull, not with brute force, but precision. He dropped without a sound. She caught him before he hit the floor, lowering his weight slowly. The first man turned startled, raising his weapon. Emily was already moving. She closed the distance in 2 steps, slapped the rifle aside and struck upward with her elbow into his throat. His breath collapsed into a wet gasp. She twisted his arm, used his momentum and slammed him into the wall hard enough to knock the wind out of him, but not hard enough to crack drywall. She held him there, forearm across his chest. "Don't," she whispered. His eyes widened, not with fear but disbelief. He hadn't expected resistance. Not like this. She eased him down and bound his wrists with the loose watch strap and gauze in one practiced motion. Then she dragged both men into the stairwell, closing the door quietly behind her. 2 down. Emily leaned against the wall for half a second, eyes closed, not to rest but to listen. More footsteps, at least 3 this time, coming from the opposite direction. She moved. Emily slipped into a patient room and pulled the curtain halfway, positioning herself between the bed and the wall. The patient, a frail older woman, stared at her in terror. Emily pressed a finger gently to her lips. "Stay quiet," she mouthed. The woman nodded, clutching her blanket. The door opened. A man stepped in, weapon raised. He scanned the room quickly, eyes flicking from bed to bathroom to window. He saw the curtain move. "Clear," he muttered into his radio. Emily waited until he turned away. Then she struck. She grabbed the back of his vest, pulled him off balance, and drove his head into the doorframe. He went down hard. She disarmed him and slid the weapon under the bed with her foot. Before she could reposition, another man rushed in. This one was faster. Emily barely ducked in time as the butt of a rifle swung past her head, grazing her shoulder. Pain flared sharp and immediate. She ignored it. They grappled, crashing into the bed. The patient screamed. Emily shifted her weight, hooked the man's knee, and sent him sprawling. He scrambled to recover, eyes locked on her with something new now, recognition. "You're not a nurse," he growled. Emily didn't answer. She kicked the rifle away, dropped to one knee, and drove her fist into his solar plexus. Once, twice. He collapsed, gasping. She pinned him and bound his hands, her movements efficient even as blood seeped through her sleeve from a shallow cut on her arm. 4 down. Emily stood slowly, pulse steady but elevated. Her shoulder throbbed. She rolled it once, testing range of motion. Functional. She stepped back into the hallway. Chaos was spreading now. Patients cried out. A doctor yelled for help. Somewhere glass shattered. Emily spotted Dr. Reed near the trauma bay, frozen in place as 2 armed men advanced. She didn't shout. She grabbed a metal supply tray from a nearby cart and hurled it down the hall, not at the men but past them. The crash drew their attention just long enough. Emily closed in from behind. She struck one with a baton-like swing, using the tray, catching him at the base of the neck. He dropped. The other turned, firing wildly. A bullet shattered a light fixture overhead. Emily tackled him, slamming him into the wall. They struggled, breath hot and close. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he snarled. Emily locked his wrist and forced him down. "Neither do you." She disarmed him and shoved him face first onto the floor, planting a knee between his shoulder blades. Silence fell in the hallway, broken only by alarms now finally blaring. Dr. Reed stared at her, eyes wide. "Emily, what the hell? Get everyone out of this wing," she said. "Now, use the back stairwell." "But security is compromised," she cut in. "Move." He didn't argue. As staff rushed to evacuate patients, Emily pressed her hand to her bleeding arm. It wasn't deep. It could wait. She stepped back, scanning for the next threat. That's when she heard it. Slow clapping. Emily turned. At the far end of the hall stood a tall man in tactical gear, weapon, lowered eyes fixed on her, with something between curiosity and respect. "Well," he said calmly, "this hospital just got a lot more interesting." Emily met his gaze without flinching. So did he. And in that moment she knew the quiet phase was over. The man's slow clap echoed down the hallway, each sound deliberate, measured like everything else about him. Emily Carter didn't move. She kept her stance loose, weight-centered, eyes level. Her right hand hovered near the wall-mounted fire extinguisher. Her left hung relaxed at her side, fingers slightly curled. Anyone watching closely might have noticed how she positioned herself just off the center line of the hall, forcing an attacker to commit before closing distance. The man noticed. "Impressive work," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Most civilians freeze. You didn't." "I'm not a civilian," Emily replied before she could stop herself. The words landed heavier than she intended. The man smiled faintly. "No," he agreed. "You're not." Behind him, the corridor lights flickered again. Smoke drifted from a shattered fixture. Somewhere nearby, a patient monitor beeped, steadily oblivious to the danger threading closer with every second. The man raised a hand, signaling to someone out of sight. "Stand down," he said into his comm. "I've got eyes on the problem." Problem, Emily thought. That's what I am to him. She took a small step sideways, aligning herself with a doorway. Her shoulder protested sharply. She ignored it. "You picked the wrong hospital," she said. "Walk out now. You might still make it." The man chuckled softly. "You're in no position to make threats." Emily's gaze flicked briefly to the floor. Blood droplets dotted the tile hers. Too visible. She shifted her foot to smear them, breaking the trail. "Who's the patient in 3B?" she asked. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. Straight to the point. "I like that." That wasn't an answer. "No," he said. "It was a test." He took a step forward. Emily moved simultaneously, closing the distance faster than he expected. She grabbed the fire extinguisher, yanked it free, and swung not at him but at the ceiling. White powder exploded into the air, filling the corridor in a choking cloud. She dove through the doorway just as gunfire erupted. Bullets chewed into the wall where she'd been standing seconds earlier. Emily hit the floor, hard-rolled, and came up behind a gurney. She tore a strip from her sleeve and cinched it tight around her bleeding arm, teeth gritted. Think. Breathe. Move. Footsteps approached cautiously through the haze. Emily rolled the gurney forward with a sharp shove, sending it crashing into the advancing silhouette. She followed immediately low and fast, sweeping the man's legs out from under him. They hit the floor together. He was strong, trained. He recovered quickly, striking upward and catching her across the jaw. Stars flared in her vision. Emily responded with a knee to his ribs, then another. He grunted but didn't release his grip. "You're military," he said through clenched teeth. "But you fight like an instructor." Emily twisted, broke free, and rolled away just as another shot cracked the wall inches from her head. She sprinted, down the hall through a fire door into the dimmer administrative wing. Her lungs burned, but her pace didn't slow. She cut left, then right, doubling back, using the building's layout like a map she'd memorized under stress years ago. She burst into a supply room and slammed the door behind her, bracing it with a steel cart. For a moment, she stood there, breathing hard, blood pounding in her ears. "This is exactly what you walked away from," she thought. "And here you are." Her radio crackled. "Dr. Reed to anyone security isn't responding. We've got armed suspects on 3 and 4. Emily picked up the radio. "Evacuate toward the helipad stairwell," she said. "Stay low. Lights off if you can." Emily Reed asked. "How do you? Just do it." She clicked the radio off. The door rattled as someone tested the handle from the outside. Emily scanned the room. Shelves of supplies. Metal. Plastic. Nothing designed to stop bullets. She grabbed a fire axe from its mount and waited, positioning herself beside the door instead of in front of it. The handle burst inward. The man from before stepped through, weapon raised. Emily struck. She swung the axe sideways, slamming the flat of the blade into his forearm. Bone cracked. He screamed, dropping the weapon. She followed through, driving the axe handle into his chest and sending him sprawling backward. She kicked the gun away and pressed her boot to his throat. "Who sent you?" she demanded. He coughed, eyes burning with anger. "You think this ends with us. It ends when you talk." He laughed, a wet, broken sound. "You're protecting someone who doesn't deserve it." Emily tightened the pressure slightly. "Try again." Before he could answer, the radio at his shoulder crackled. "We've got movement near the stairwell," a voice said. "And Jesus' military inbound." Emily's heart skipped. Too fast, she thought. That wasn't supposed to happen yet. She knocked the man unconscious with a swift strike. and stepped back into the hallway, pulse roaring. Down the corridor, she saw it through the windows at the far end, the rotating blades of a helicopter slicing through the night sky, floodlights blazing as it descended toward the hospital roof. Gasps rippled through the evacuating staff. "What is that?" someone cried. "Is that the National Guard?" Emily stared, a knot forming in her chest. She knew better. The helicopter's markings were unmistakable to anyone who'd lived that life. She turned away before anyone could read her face. Footsteps pounded behind her boots, purposeful and organized. A team emerged from the stairwell, weapons up, movements crisp. Their leader froze when he saw her. His eyes narrowed, then widened. "Holy hell," he breathed. Carter Emily closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. So much for invisible. She opened them again, meeting his gaze. "You're late." He stared at her bloodied scrubs, calm eyes, controlled breathing, and shook his head slowly. "You're the last person I expected to find here." Before she could respond, the man from earlier staggered back into view, clutching his broken arm, fury blazing in his eyes. "That's her!" he shouted. "She's the one," weapons snapped up. Emily stepped forward instinctively, placing herself between the team and the staff, cowering behind her. "Stand down," she said. "He's done." The team leader didn't lower his weapon. He didn't raise it either. Instead, he said quietly with something like awe, "Ma'am." "Is it true?" Emily hesitated. "Just long enough." "That depends," she said. "What did you hear?" He swallowed. "That the night nurse just neutralized half a paramilitary unit without breaking eye contact." The hallway went silent, and every pair of eyes turned to her. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire. Emily Carter stood at the center of it, aware of every breath around her, every set of eyes fixed on her blood-stained scrubs. The corridor no longer looked like a hospital hallway. It looked like an after-action report waiting to be written, spent casings on the floor, smoke hanging in the air, men groaning where they'd fallen. The team leader lowered his weapon first, slowly, respectfully. His name patch read Mason, late 30s, solid build, the kind of man who carried authority without raising his voice. "Everyone safe?" he asked his team, never taking his eyes off Emily. "Clear one," operator replied. "Multiple suspects down, restrained," said another. "Perimeter, secure on this level." Mason nodded once. Then he looked at Emily again, disbelief softening into something closer to understanding. "You disappear for 6 years," he said quietly. "And this is where I find you, Emily." Exhaled, the tension finally catching up to her body. Her shoulder throbbed, her jaw ached where she'd been hit. She ignored all of it. "This isn't my operation," she said. "These people are my responsibility right now." Mason glanced past her at the staff clustered near the stairwell, doctors gripping each other, nurses shaking, patients being wheeled away as quickly and carefully as possible. "Looks like you handled that responsibility just fine," he said. A stretcher rolled by, pushed by 2 medics. Emily instinctively stepped forward to help guide it around debris, adjusting the IV pole without being asked. Muscle memory, habit, identity layered over identity. One of the younger operators watched her eyes wide. "She's bleeding," he muttered. Emily followed his gaze to her sleeve. Dark red had soaked through the makeshift bandage. "It's nothing," she said. Mason wasn't convinced. "You need to get checked, after everyone else." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Same as always. Before either of them could say more, a sharp voice cut through the corridor. "There she is." Emily turned to see Dr. Reed pushing through the crowd, face pale but eyes burning with a mix of fear and fury. "You," he said, pointing at her. "Emily, what did you do?" She met his stare calmly. "I stopped them. You disobeyed protocol. You put yourself and everyone else at risk." Mason stepped between them slightly. "Doctor, I'd recommend you lower your voice," Reed scoffed. "And who are you? Someone who's grateful your staff is still breathing." Reed opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He looked around again at the restrained attackers, the armed team, the helicopter lights flashing through the windows. His anger drained, replaced by confusion. He looked back at Emily. "Who are you?" The question hung there, raw and unavoidable. Emily felt it then, the familiar pressure in her chest. The one that always came when the past tried to drag her back into the open. She could lie. She could deflect. She could disappear behind procedure and paperwork like she always did. Instead, she said, "I'm your night nurse." Reed stared at her. "That's not an answer." "No," Emily agreed. "It's the only one you need right now." Mason cleared his throat. "Doctor, we'll need access to the patient in Ward 3B. Federal authority." Reed nodded numbly. "Of course. Of course." As Reed walked away, Sarah Mitchell approached Emily cautiously. Her hands were still shaking. "You told me to trust you," Sarah said. "I didn't understand why." Emily met her eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't explain." Sarah swallowed. "You saved us." Emily didn't respond. Praise always felt like something that belonged to someone else. Down the hall, the restrained man with the broken arm groaned as two operators hauled him upright. His eyes locked onto Emily with pure hatred. "You think this ends here?" he spat. "You think you won?" Emily stepped closer until they were face to face. "I don't think about winning," she said quietly. "I think about stopping people like you." He sneered. "You're hiding in a hospital. That tells me everything." For the first time, Emily's expression hardened. "No," she said. "It tells you I chose a place where people come to be saved." Mason gave a subtle nod to his team. They dragged the man away. As the hallway began to clear, Emily finally allowed herself to lean against the wall. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Mason approached again, lowering his voice. "They weren't just after the patient," he said. "This was a message. They expected minimal resistance." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "They didn't plan for me." "No," he said. "They planned for anonymity, soft targets." She opened her eyes. "What about the patient being transferred now? Secure location. Good." Mason hesitated. "Emily, you can't stay invisible after this." She gave a tired half smile. "I was never invisible. People just didn't look closely." A medic approached with a stretcher. "Ma'am, we need to take you to triage." Emily glanced down the hallway one last time. The chaos was fading. Order slowly was returning. She nodded. "Okay." As they guided her onto the stretcher, she caught sight of the helicopter through the glass rotors, slowing lights dimming. The noise faded, but the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, and Emily knew deep down that the hardest part wasn't over yet. The triage room smelled like antiseptic and overheated plastic. Machines hummed softly, their steady rhythms almost mocking after the violence of the last hour. Emily Carter lay back on the narrow bed as a medic cleaned the cut on her arm, the sting sharp enough to anchor her back in her body. "You're lucky," the medic said. "Missed the muscle by maybe half an inch." Emily watched the ceiling tiles. Luck had nothing to do with it. The medic paused, glanced at her face, then returned to work without comment. Across the room, Mason stood with his arms crossed, posture relaxed but alert. He'd been there the whole time, giving the impression of space while making it clear she wasn't alone or forgotten. "You should have let us take over sooner," he said quietly. Emily didn't look at him. "I did what I had to." "That's what you always said," Mason replied. "Even when command told you to stand down." She finally turned her head. "And how many people walked away alive because I didn't?" Mason didn't answer. The door opened and Dr. Reed stepped in, his white coat, wrinkled hair disheveled. He looked older than he had an hour ago. "We need to talk," he said. Emily sighed and sat up carefully, ignoring the protest in her shoulder. About the fact that you neutralized armed intruders, coordinated evacuations, and somehow knew federal response timelines," Reed said. "That's not in any nursing manual I've read." Mason shifted slightly but stayed silent. Emily met Reed's gaze. "Do you want the hospital safe or do you want an explanation?" Reed hesitated. "Both. You can only have one tonight." Reed exhaled slowly. "The board is already asking questions." "Then tell them the truth," Emily said. "Tell them a nurse followed her training and protected patients." Reed barked a short laugh. "That's not training, Emily. That's something else." Before she could respond, a uniformed federal agent entered, badge clipped neatly, expression tight. "Emily Carter," the agent said. "We need to verify your identity." Emily's jaw tightened. "I've already given my name." The agent glanced at Mason, who gave a small nod. "Not the name," the agent said. "Your past service." The room went quiet. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the decision had already been made. "United States Army," she said evenly. "Former Ranger." "Instructor." Reed's breath caught audibly. Mason didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. The agent raised an eyebrow. That aligns with what we're seeing. Reed took a step back. You're telling me the night nurse is the reason your hospital is still standing? Mason cut in. Reed swallowed hard. The agent checked his tablet. You left active service under honorable circumstances. Emily nodded. Yes. And you declined further assignments? Yes. Why? Emily's eyes flicked to the doorway, then back. That's not relevant. The agent studied her for a long moment. It might be. Before Emily could answer, shouting echoed from down the hall. They all turned as security monitors flickered to life on the wall screen. On it, chaos unfolded. A group of men, more than before, poured into the hospital's lower level. Heavily armed, organized, moving fast. Mason swore under his breath. That's not a contingency team. That's a retrieval force. The agent's face darkened. They weren't supposed to know this location. Emily was already swinging her legs off the bed. They followed the noise. Or the helicopter. You're injured, Reed protested. Emily grabbed her jacket. So are they. Difference is, I know this building. Mason stepped into her path. This isn't your fight anymore. Emily looked at him, eyes hard. It was never not my fight. The agent hesitated. We can evacuate. They'll cut us off, Emily said. They're not here for subtlety now. They're here to erase witnesses. Reed went pale. Patients are priority, Emily said. Same as before. She turned to Mason. How many do you have? 8, he replied. 10 if we count air support. Emily shook her head. Not enough. Mason stared at her. What are you thinking I'm thinking, she said, already moving toward the door that they expect you. She stopped at the threshold and looked back at him. They don't expect me anymore, she continued. Which means I can still move where you can't. That's insane, Reed said. Emily met his eyes. So was staying invisible for 6 years. The alarms blared again, louder this time. Red lights pulsed along the corridor, bathing the hospital in a warning glow. Emily grabbed a radio and clipped it to her waistband. Lock down the upper floors. Move patients to interior rooms. Lights off where possible. She paused, then added, and trust me. Mason followed her into the hallway. You don't have to prove anything. Emily stopped walking. This isn't about proving, she said quietly. It's about responsibility. Once you know how to stop something, you don't get to pretend you don't. The floor vibrated beneath their feet as explosions echoed below controlled breaches, methodical and terrifying. Mason looked at her recognition, finally settling into full understanding. You trained people to fight like this, he said. Yes, and now you're fighting your own students. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. No. She looked down the stairwell, eyes focused, breathing steady. I'm fighting the people who forgot why they were trained in the first place. She disappeared into the smoke-filled corridor before anyone could stop her. Mason watched her go, dread and respect, twisting together in his chest. Somewhere below, armed men advanced upward, confident, aggressive, certain of victory. None of them knew that the quiet night nurse was already counting their steps. The stairwell smelled of concrete dust and burned plastic. Emily Carter descended one flight at a time, keeping her weight light. One hand grazing the railing, the other steadying the radio at her hip. The emergency lights cast everything in a dull red glow, flattening depth, stealing shadows, bad conditions for anyone who relied on surprise. She adjusted anyway. They'll be disciplined, she told herself. Not reckless. That means angles, overwatch, noise as bait. Below her, voices carried upward, short commands clipped professional. Boots moved in pairs, a team that trusted its training and its numbers. Emily stopped at the landing between floors and crouched, listening. 2 up front, 1 rear, a voice said. She closed her eyes for a single breath and mapped the stairwell in her head. Width, riser height. The metal lip where the handrail bolted into the wall. The sprinkler head 2 feet above the landing, old, brittle. She slipped off her watch completely and wedged it beneath the sprinkler's metal ring, twisting until she felt resistance. A sharp pull snapped the ring loose. Water exploded downward, hammering the steps with a roar that swallowed sound and sight. Contact, someone shouted. Emily moved as the first man burst through, the spray-coughing weapon raised. She slid in low, swept his ankle, and used the wet steps to her advantage. He went down hard. She followed him, driving his shoulder into the concrete. disarming him with a torque that forced a scream from his throat. The second man fired blind into the water. Emily pressed flat against the wall, waited for the muzzle flash, then surged forward and slammed her elbow into his jaw. Teeth cracked. He dropped. She bound them both with torn cable from a nearby junction box, then dragged them aside as footsteps pounded below. No time to linger. Emily slipped through the fire door into the administrative wing, heart pounding but controlled. The wing was darker, power cut partially to limit spread. Offices lined the corridor, glass walls reflecting her movement in fragments. She slowed. They'll adapt now. She heard it in their voices, anger edging into discipline, the kind that made people dangerous instead of sloppy. A burst of gunfire shattered glass behind her. She dove into an office, rolled behind a desk and yanked the chair down as cover. Bullets tore through drywall inches above her head. Flush her out, someone barked. Emily grabbed a stapler and hurled it toward the doorframe. It clattered loudly, drawing fire. While they focused on the noise, she crawled to the side window and smashed it with a chair leg, sending shards into the hall. Smoke grenades rolled in. Emily pulled her sleeve over her mouth and slid under the desk, counting seconds. She knew the pattern 3 breaths before the rush. She kicked the desk forward just as the first man charged in. He tripped. She rose behind him and locked him into a chokehold, using his body as a shield. As the second man fired, she pivoted, letting the bullets hit the man she held, then shoved him forward and dove through the broken window into the hall. She landed hard, pain flashing through her shoulder, but she kept moving. Down the corridor, she spotted a cluster of patients being hurried along by staff, panic creeping in again. "No," she shouted. "This way, interior rooms now." They froze, recognized her voice, and moved. Emily turned back just as the tall man from earlier, the one who'd clapped, stepped into view. His arm was bound crudely, but his eyes were sharp. "You're bleeding," he said, almost conversational. "And you're slowing." Emily squared up, breath steady. "You talk too much." He smiled thinly. "Instructor habit. We talk so they listen." That word hit her harder than any blow. "Instructor." He advanced carefully. She mirrored him. Neither rushed. "You trained people like me," he continued. "Then you vanished. Left us with theories and scars." "I left," Emily said, "because you're not supposed to enjoy this." He laughed softly. "You're wrong. We enjoy winning." He lunged. They collided in the center of the hall, trading blows that echoed off the walls. He was strong, stronger than most she'd faced tonight. He anticipated her counters, blocked her strikes. "You taught us to adapt," he said between breaths. "And you forgot restraint," she shot back, ducking a punch and driving her knee into his thigh. He staggered, then recovered, swinging again. His fist caught her shoulder, sending a jolt of pain down her arm. She hissed, but stayed upright. "Why hide as a nurse?" he demanded. "Why waste what you are?" Emily slammed her forehead into his nose. He reeled back, swearing. "I didn't hide," she said. "I chose." She swept his legs and pinned him, pressing her forearm across his throat. "Stand down," she ordered. He spat blood and smiled. "You think this ends with me?" Before she could answer, a rifle barrel appeared at her temple. "Drop him," a new voice said. Emily froze. She released her grip slowly and rose to her feet, hands open. 3 men surrounded her, now weapons trained, eyes cold. The tall man coughed and stood wiping blood from his face. "Told you," he said to them. "She's the one." Emily glanced past them toward the windows. Outside, more helicopters circled law enforcement this time. Sirens wailed below. Time was compressing. "You don't have an exit," she said. "This ends here." The tall man shrugged. "It ends when we make a point." He nodded to one of his men who reached for a detonator clipped to his vest. Emily's pulse spiked. "Don't she?" said voice sharp. The man hesitated just a fraction. Emily moved. She spun, grabbed the rifle barrel, and yanked it downward as she kicked the detonator hand hard. The device skidded across the floor. Gunfire erupted. Emily dove, rolled, and came up behind a column as bullets chewed into the wall. She snatched the detonator and hurled it through a window. The explosion outside was muffled but violent, rattling the building. Screams echoed from below. The men faltered, shocked. Emily didn't waste it. She charged, striking with everything she had left, elbows, knees, the edge of her hand. One man went down, then another. The tall man tried to retreat, but she tackled him, slamming him into the wall. They slid to the floor together, both breathing hard. "This isn't who you were meant to be," Emily said, pinning him. He looked up at her, eyes burning. "Neither is hiding." She tightened her grip until his breath hitched. "Hiding is choosing not to become you." Footsteps thundered in the stairwell. Mason's voice cut through the chaos. "Emily, Federal team inbound now." She cuffed the man with his own restraints and staggered to her feet, vision narrowing. As Mason and the team poured in, weapons raised, Emily leaned against the wall, finally feeling the weight of it all crash down. Her legs shook, her hands trembled, but the corridor was secure, and for the first time that night, the armed men were the ones lying still. Emily Carter slid down the wall as the last echo of gunfire faded, her breath coming shallow and sharp. The red emergency lights pulsed overhead, each flash revealing more damage, bullet scars, shattered glass, dark smears on the floor that hadn't been there an hour ago. Mason reached her first. "Stay with me," he said, gripping her shoulder carefully. "Emily, look at me." She forced her eyes open. "I'm here." Barely, he muttered, signaling to his team. "Secure the detainees. Sweep the wing again." Boots moved fast. Radios crackled. The building exhaled tension in broken pieces. Mason crouched in front of her. "You took a hit to the shoulder. Possible concussion." "I've had worse," Emily said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as the adrenaline finally began to drain. "That's not reassuring." She almost smiled. Down the hall, Federal agents swarmed in their movements, crisp, coordinated. Yellow-jacketed law enforcement followed, weapons lowered now, eyes scanning for threats that no longer moved. The tall man, the one who'd called her Instructor, was hauled to his feet in restraints. As he passed her, he stopped. "You could have stayed gone," he said quietly. Emily looked up at him, eyes cold but tired. "And let this become normal," he searched her face, something like doubt flickering there for the first time. They dragged him away. The corridor filled with voices, questions, orders, fragments of disbelief. "Is it true she did all that? She's just a nurse." Emily closed her eyes. A familiar weight settled in her chest. Not fear, not regret. Exposure. A woman in a dark suit approached, flanked by 2 agents. Her badge flashed briefly. "Department of Justice." "Emily Carter," the woman said. "I'm Special Agent Laura Hensley." Emily pushed herself to her feet with Mason's help. "You have my statement already." Hensley nodded. "We also have your record." Emily didn't respond. "You trained Ranger candidates for 3 years," Hensley continued. "Specialized in close quarters combat and stress inoculation." Reed appeared behind her, listening face pale. "And you walked away," Hensley added. "No retirement ceremony, no press. You vanished." Emily's jaw tightened. "I resigned." Why? Emily met her gaze. "Because I didn't trust myself anymore." The hallway went quiet again. Hensley studied her carefully. "That's not in your file." "No," Emily said. "It wouldn't be." Mason shifted beside her. "She saved this hospital." "I can see that," Hensley replied. "The question is, what happens now?" Emily felt every eye turn toward her. "What do you want to happen?" Emily asked. Hensley didn't answer immediately. "The media's outside." They tracked the helicopters. "This won't stay quiet." Emily let out a slow breath. "It never does." Reed finally spoke. "She's one of my nurses." Hensley glanced at him. "Doctor, with respect, she's a Federal asset, whether she wants to be or not." Emily shook her head. "I'm done being an asset." Hensley raised an eyebrow. "After tonight, that may not be your call." Before Emily could respond, an agent hurried over, urgency in his voice. "Ma'am, there's something you need to see." They followed him down to the lower level where the retrieval team had first breached. The scene was controlled, now suspects lined up against the wall, hands zip-tied, heads down. On a table nearby lay confiscated equipment, rifles, radios, body armor, and a laminated photograph. Emily recognized it instantly. It was her, younger, in uniform, standing in front of a group of soldiers, eyes sharp, posture commanding. "Instructor!" Emily's stomach dropped. "They knew who you were," Mason said quietly. Hensley nodded. "This wasn't random. They targeted the hospital because of the patient, and because of you." Emily stared at the photo, memories flooding back uninvited. Training fields, screams, failure drills, faces she'd sent back again and again until they broke or adapted. Someone from my past, she said. Yes, Hensley replied. And not just one. Emily closed her eyes. So this was a test, she murmured. Mason frowned. Test for what? For whether I'd step back in, Emily said. Reed looked between them, overwhelmed. You're saying they came here because of her? Emily nodded. Because they wanted to see if the instructor was still there. Hensley's voice softened slightly. And were they right? Emily thought of the patients. The staff. Sarah's shaking hands. The way she'd moved without hesitation when lives were on the line. Yes, she said quietly. But not for the reason they think. Hensley studied her. You stopped them without executing a single suspect. Emily looked up. I taught restraint before I taught aggression. That's not how your students turned out, Hensley said. Emily's eyes hardened. Then I failed them. The silence that followed was heavy. Mason broke it. What's the status of the hospital? Secure, an agent replied. No further threats detected. Outside, sirens faded. The rotors of the last helicopter slowed to a stop. Hensley turned back to Emily. You have two options. Emily waited. You can cooperate, fully testify, and let this define you again, Hensley said. Or you can walk back into your life as a nurse, knowing it may never be invisible again. Emily glanced at Reed. He looked at her not as a mystery now, but as a colleague, as someone who'd stood between him and chaos. You saved my people, he said quietly. Whatever you choose, you have a place here. Sarah appeared at the end of the hall, eyes red but steady. When she saw Emily standing, she let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. Emily felt something loosen inside her chest. She turned back to Hensley. I'll cooperate, she said, but I'm not coming back. Hensley nodded. Understood. Emily looked down at her blood-stained scrubs, then back up at the hospital around her. I didn't leave the army because I was done protecting people, she said. I left because I wanted to protect the ones who never chose the fight. She took a breath. And I still do. Hensley extended a hand. Then tonight wasn't a return. Emily shook it. It was a reckoning. As dawn crept faintly through the high windows, the hospital stood scarred but standing. And for the first time since she'd walked away from her old life, Emily Carter didn't feel like she was running anymore. She felt like she'd finally stopped. Morning light crept through the fractured windows in thin, uncertain lines, revealing the full cost of the night. The hospital looked exhausted, walls scorched, ceiling tiles torn open, equipment pushed aside like debris after a storm. Yet beneath the damage it still breathed. Machines hummed. Patients slept. Life, stubborn and fragile, went on. Emily Carter stood near the nurse's station, a temporary bandage wrapped around her shoulder, a cup of lukewarm coffee untouched in her hand. She hadn't slept. She doubted she could. Across the hall, federal agents continued their work, photographing evidence, cataloging weapons, escorting suspects out one by one. The men who had moved through the building with such confidence hours earlier now shuffled in cuffs, eyes down, stripped of momentum and myth. Mason joined her, lowering his voice. They're transporting the detainees to a secure site. Interrogations will start within the hour. Emily nodded. Good. He studied her face. You okay? She considered the question. Physically, I'll heal. And the rest, Emily stared at the floor where the blood had been cleaned but faint outlines still lingered. Ask me in a week. Mason gave a short, understanding nod. Hensley wants another word. Emily sighed and set the coffee aside. Special Agent Hensley waited near the administrative office, tablet in hand, expression focused but no longer sharp-edged. When Emily approached, Hensley dismissed the nearby agent with a gesture. We've identified the group, Hensley said. Former contractors, some ex-military, others less disciplined. Emily wasn't surprised. They didn't move like amateurs. They moved like people who believed they were justified, Hensley replied. That's more dangerous. Emily leaned against the wall. You said they targeted me. Yes, Hensley said. Not just because of who you were, but because of what you represented. Emily waited. You were known for one thing, Hensley continued. You didn't just train people to fight. You trained them to think, to endure, to operate when fear took over. Emily closed her eyes briefly. I trained them to protect, and some of them twisted that, Hensley said. They formed their own ideology, their own hierarchy. Emily's chest tightened. And now they're testing the limits. They were, Hensley corrected. Until tonight. A pause settled between them. "Media pressure is building," Hensley said. "They want a name, a face, a hero." Emily shook her head immediately. "No. You stopped a coordinated armed assault in a civilian hospital," Hensley said. "That story is coming out whether you like it or not." "Then tell it without me," Emily replied. "Focus on the staff, the patients, the system that held." Hensley studied her carefully. "You still think you can stay in the background?" Emily met her gaze. "I think some things deserve quiet." Before Hensley could respond, Dr. Reed approached, posture stiff but eyes clear. "I've spoken with the board," he said. "They want to place you on administrative leave." Emily nodded. "I expected that. Not as punishment," Reed added quickly. "As protection. For you and for us." Emily appreciated the honesty. "How long until we understand what comes next?" She exhaled slowly. "Fair." Reed hesitated. "I misjudged you." Emily looked at him. "You judged me by my badge. That's human." Reed shook his head. "No, I judged you by your silence." Emily didn't respond. Sarah approached next, her face tired but determined. She stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to step closer. "I heard what they said," Sarah began. "About who you were." Emily waited. "I don't care," Sarah continued. "Last night, when everything fell apart, you didn't." Emily met her eyes. "You held your ground too." Sarah swallowed. "Because you told me to." Emily felt something warm and unfamiliar settle in her chest. Pride, maybe, or relief. As the morning wore on, the hospital slowly returned to function. Replacement staff arrived. Damaged wards were sealed. Patients were reassured, then reassured again. And through it all, Emily remained still, observing, listening, absorbing. Late morning, the last helicopter lifted off. The final suspect was escorted away. The noise faded. Hensley approached one final time. "There's one more thing," she said. Emily looked up. "What one of the detainees requested to speak with you?" Emily stiffened. "Which one?" the leader Hensley replied. "The one you restrained personally." Emily considered it. "Why, he says there are others," Hensley said. "Cells, plans. He claims he won't talk to anyone else." Emily's jaw tightened. "He wants absolution. Or leverage," Hensley said. Emily pushed off the wall. 5 minutes. They led her to a quiet room bare except for a table and 2 chairs. The man sat, cuffed face, bruised eyes, sharp despite exhaustion. He looked up when she entered. "You came," he said. "I didn't promise anything," Emily replied, taking a seat across from him. He studied her. "You look different in daylight. So do you." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "You always said fear distorts perception." Emily folded her hands on the table. "What do you want?" "To understand," he said. "Why you left. Why you chose this life." Emily leaned forward slightly. "I left because I saw what happens when power stops being accountable." "You taught us power," he countered. "I taught you responsibility," Emily said sharply. "You chose something else." His gaze dropped. "We believed we were continuing your work." Emily shook her head. "No, you were chasing control." Silence stretched. "There are others," he said quietly. "They're watching. They won't stop." Emily met his eyes. "Then they'll fail too." He looked up, searching her face. "You really believe that?" "Yes," she said. "Because the difference between us is simple. What difference I know when to stop." She stood, signaling the end. As she left the room, Emily felt lighter, not unburdened but aligned. The reckoning she'd feared had come and gone. What remained was choice, and for the first time in years she knew exactly where she stood. The hospital changed its rhythm by early afternoon. Not back to normal. Normal would take weeks, but into something steadier, more deliberate. Hallways, once sealed with tape, reopened in stages. Replacement lights washed over scarred walls. The smell of smoke faded beneath disinfectant, and coffee brewed too strong for too many tired hands. Emily Carter stood at the edge of Ward 3B, watching an orderly replace a shattered window with a temporary panel. The patient who had drawn so much violence lay sedated, now guarded by 2 agents who barely spoke. Whatever he knew, whatever he had done, it was no longer Emily's concern. Her concern was the people moving past her, Nurses returning to stations, doctors speaking in lower voices than usual, patients peeking out from rooms with cautious curiosity. She had stayed long enough to help stabilize what she could. IVs checked, medications reconciled, a hand on a shoulder when someone's composure finally broke. Each small act felt grounding. Mason found her near the supply alcove, posture looser than it had been all night. "Perimeters cleared," he said. "City PD is taking over external security." "Good," Emily replied. He hesitated. "You don't have to stay." She looked at him. "I know. You could walk out now," he continued. "Avoid the cameras. The questions." Emily followed his gaze to the far end of the hall, where a cluster of reporters waited behind glass doors, lenses poised like weapons of their own. "I've spent years avoiding questions," she said. "That doesn't mean I run from answers." Mason nodded, respect clear in his eyes. "You always did pick the harder path." "Doctor," Reed approached, then flanked by two administrators who looked as if they hadn't slept in days. Their suits were rumpled expressions tight with stress and calculation. Emily Reed said, "We're issuing a statement." She raised an eyebrow. About, last night," one administrator replied. "We'll acknowledge an armed intrusion, praise emergency response." And, "No," Emily interrupted calmly. The administrator blinked. "Excuse me, no names," Emily said. "No spotlight." Reed glanced at her, then at the administrator. "She's right." The administrator frowned. "Doctor, she protected our patients," Reed said firmly. "That's all the public needs to know." Emily felt a quiet gratitude settle in her chest. The administrator exhaled sharply but nodded. "Fine, but this doesn't disappear." "I'm not asking it to," Emily said. "I'm asking it to be accurate." A nurse hurried up, eyes wide. "They're asking for you." Emily turned. "Who?" "The families," the nurse said. "They heard what happened. They want to thank." Emily shook her head gently. "Tell them we did our jobs." The nurse hesitated, then nodded and hurried off. Reed watched her for a long moment. "You could have let them." "Gratitude turns into expectation," Emily said. "I don't want either." A siren wailed faintly outside ambulance traffic, returning to normal flow. The sound felt almost comforting now. Hensley appeared again, her suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up. "We've confirmed additional cells," she said quietly. "Your detainee wasn't lying." Emily nodded once. "Then you know what you need to do." "We do," Hensley agreed. "But we also know who they'll look to." Emily met her gaze. "They won't find me." Hensley studied her. "You're choosing the quiet road again." Emily glanced down the corridor at Sarah, guiding a patient at Reed, conferring with staff at a janitor, sweeping glass with meticulous care. "I'm choosing the right one," she said. Hensley extended a hand. "If that ever changes," Emily shook it. "I know where to find you." As Hensley walked away, Mason lingered. "You sure about this?" Emily smiled faintly. "I've never been more sure." He hesitated, then pulled a small object from his pocket, a worn ranger tab, edges frayed. "I kept this," he said. "Figured I'd give it back someday." Emily stared at it, memory pressing close. Mud. Sweat. Voices raised in training fields under unforgiving sun. She shook her head. "It belongs to the past." Mason closed his fingers around it again, understanding. "Then this is goodbye." "For now," Emily said. He nodded and walked away, boots echoing softly. By late afternoon, the crowd outside thinned. Cameras packed up. The story shifted to headlines, and speculation no longer tethered to the hallway where it had unfolded. Emily returned to the nurse's station to collect her things. Her locker door creaked as she opened it. Inside were scrubs, a spare pair of shoes, a small notebook she used to track shifts and reminders. Nothing extraordinary. Sarah appeared beside her. "They're putting you on leave," she said. "Paid." "I know." Sarah bit her lip. "When you come back," Emily paused. "If." Sarah smiled, tentative but hopeful. "If. We'll be better prepared." Emily closed the locker. "You already are." They stood there a moment longer, sharing an understanding that didn't need explanation. At the exit, Emily stopped. She looked back one last time at the hospital, at the place that had tested her anonymity and confirmed her purpose. She stepped outside into late afternoon light, the sky clear, the air cool. Sirens were distant now. Traffic flowed. People walked dogs and checked phones, unaware of how close chaos had come. Emily took a deep breath. She didn't feel exposed. She felt resolved. Because justice hadn't arrived in the roar of helicopters or the flash of badges. It had arrived quietly in restraint, in choice, in standing between harm and those who never asked for it. And that was a kind of strength she could live with. Administrative leave felt heavier than any rucksack Emily Carter had ever carried. 2 days after the breach, she sat alone at the small kitchen table of her apartment, sunlight filtering through half-closed blinds. A cup of coffee cooled beside her, untouched the surface, gone flat and bitter. The city outside moved on, cars passed, a siren wailed somewhere far away, a neighbor laughed on a phone call. Normal life resumed. Emily rolled her shoulder carefully. The stitches pulled, reminding her that the night hadn't been a dream. Her phone buzzed for the 3rd time that morning. She didn't answer. News notifications stacked up on the screen, headlines skirting the truth without quite naming it. Armed intrusion thwarted at City Hospital. Quick thinking by medical staff saves lives. There were quotes from officials, from administrators, from anonymous sources who speculated wildly. Her name appeared nowhere. She'd insisted on that. A knock came at the door. Emily stood slowly, senses alert, despite the familiar setting. She checked the peephole before opening it. "Doctor." Reed stood in the hallway, tie loosened dark circles under his eyes. He held a paper bag in one hand. "I come in peace," he said lightly. Emily stepped aside. "You didn't have to come." "I wanted to," he replied, entering and setting the bag on the table. "Hospital cafeteria leftovers. It's terrible food, but it's familiar." Emily allowed a small smile. "You didn't strike me as sentimental." "I wasn't," Reed said, "until I watched my ER turn into a war zone." They sat across from each other in silence for a moment. "The board finalized their review," Reed said eventually. "They're satisfied with the official narrative." "And unofficially?" Emily asked. Reed met her gaze. "Unofficially, they're afraid." Emily nodded. "That's fair. They're afraid of what you represent," Reed continued, "and of what they didn't see." Emily leaned back slightly. "I didn't lie on my application." "No," Reed agreed. "You just didn't volunteer the parts that made people uncomfortable." He hesitated. "I owe you an apology." Emily raised an eyebrow. "I underestimated you," Reed said. "Not professionally, personally. I saw quiet and assumed passive." Emily considered that. "A lot of people do, and I treated that assumption as fact," Reed said. "That's on me." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Apology accepted. Reed exhaled relief, flickering across his face. "The board wants to know if you'll come back." Emily's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "Not yet," she said. Reed didn't argue. They suspected as much. "They also want you to know," he added, "that procedures are changing. Security protocols. Emergency training. You forced a reckoning." Emily looked down. "That wasn't my goal. Intent doesn't erase impact," Reed replied. Another knock sounded firmer this time. Emily stood. When she opened the door, Sarah Mitchell stood there, her posture straighter than Emily had ever seen it. "I'm not interrupting, am I?" Sarah asked. "No," Emily said. "Come in." Sarah stepped inside, glancing at Reed before focusing back on Emily. "I wanted to see you." "Why?" Emily asked gently. Sarah swallowed. "Because I froze that night." At first, Emily tilted her head. "You didn't." "I almost did," Sarah insisted. "Until you spoke. Until you looked at me like you expected me to move." Emily felt a tightening in her chest. "I didn't know I needed someone to expect more of me," Sarah continued. "But I did." Emily nodded slowly. "Fear doesn't disappear. It gets managed." Sarah took a breath. "I signed up for the advanced trauma response training. The one no one ever volunteers for." Emily smiled, genuine this time. "Good." Reed stood. "I should go." He paused at the door. "Whatever you decide, Emily, you changed this place." After he left, Sarah lingered awkwardly. "Will you come back?" Emily looked at her. "Do you want me to?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes." Emily's voice softened. "Then maybe." After Sarah left, Emily returned to the table, staring at the Ranger tab Mason had left behind, now resting beside her notebook. She hadn't meant to bring it home, but it had followed her anyway. She turned it over in her fingers. A knock, again lighter, hesitant. This time, Special Agent Hensley stood in the doorway. "You really need a doorbell," Hensley said dryly. Emily stepped aside. "You tracked me?" I asked, Hensley replied. "People talk." They stood facing each other in the small kitchen. "We disrupted 3 more cells," Hensley said. "No civilian casualties." Emily nodded. "Good, but they're adapting," Hensley added. "They always do." Emily waited. "We could use someone like you," Hensley said carefully. "Not in the field. Not officially." Emily met her gaze. "You want a consultant?" Hensley smiled faintly. "Someone who understands how these groups think and when to stop them." Emily considered it. "On my terms." "Of course," Hensley agreed. Emily glanced at the Ranger tab again. "I won't train anyone to become what I fought." "We wouldn't ask you to," Hensley said. "We want you to prevent it." Silence settled between them. "I'm not coming back to the army," Emily said finally. "I didn't think you would," Hensley replied. "But the world still needs what you know." Emily exhaled slowly. "Part-time. Advisory only." Hensley extended her hand. "That's enough." After Hensley left, the apartment felt quieter than before, not empty but settled. Emily moved to the window and looked out at the street below. A woman walked her dog. A child chased a ball. Life continued in ordinary, precious ways. She understood something then that had taken years to reach. She hadn't left strength behind when she took off the uniform. She had brought it somewhere it mattered, and whether she returned to the hospital advised from the shadows or did both, she no longer felt split between who she was and who she chose to be. For the first time since she'd walked away from the past, Emily Carter felt whole. 3 weeks later, Street Eliza Medical Center sounded like itself again. The rhythm had returned, not the frantic cadence of crisis, but the steady, familiar pulse of a working hospital. Monitors beeped in predictable patterns. Gurneys rolled past with quiet urgency. Conversations carried the low, practiced tones of people who knew where they were going and why. Emily Carter stood just outside the staff entrance badge, clipped neatly to her scrub pocket fingers, resting on the cool metal of the door handle. For a moment she didn't push it open. Administrative leave had ended that morning. No press release, no announcement, just a short email from Human Resources and a simple message from Dr. Reed Night Shift. "If you're ready." Emily rolled her shoulder once. The wound had healed cleanly, leaving a thin scar that pulled slightly when she moved, a reminder, not a limitation. She took a breath and stepped inside. The night staff looked up almost immediately. Conversations paused. Not abruptly, not awkwardly, but noticeably. Heads turned. Eyes followed her as she walked toward the locker room. Some nodded. Some smiled. A few simply watched, still unsure how to reconcile the woman in scrubs with the story they now knew pieces of. Emily didn't rush. She didn't shrink. She moved the way she always had, calm, deliberate, present. Sarah Mitchell caught sight of her and broke into a grin. "You're back. For tonight," Emily said. Sarah nodded. "That's enough." In the locker room, Emily changed quietly, slipping into the routine she knew by heart. Scrubs on. Hair tied back. Badge clipped straight. She paused briefly at her locker door where a small note had been taped. "Glad you're here." Night shift. Emily closed her eyes for just a second. When she stepped out, Dr. Reed waited near the nurse's station. He looked rested for the first time since the incident, posture looser, eyes clearer. "No special assignments," he said. "No heroics." Emily met his gaze. "You'll be disappointed." A corner of his mouth lifted. "I'll survive." The shift unfolded quietly at first. Medication rounds. Vitals. Reassurances whispered in the dark to patients who trusted the night more than the day. Emily worked, as she always had, efficient, attentive, unassuming, but something had shifted, subtle and irreversible. People listened when she spoke, not because they were afraid, because they trusted her. Near midnight, a trauma call came in, multi-car accident on the interstate 5 miles out. Not catastrophic, but complicated. The kind of situation where chaos could creep in if no one took control early. Emily stepped into the flow without announcement. She assigned beds, redirected foot traffic, adjusted staffing on the fly. Her voice never rose, never wavered. The team followed. Afterward, as the last patient was stabilized and transferred, Reed leaned against the counter beside her. "You didn't even realize you were leading," he said. Emily checked a chart. "I did." He nodded. "That's the difference." Later, during a brief lull, Emily stepped into the break room and checked her phone. One new message. Hensley. We intercepted chatter tonight. Nothing imminent. Your insight helped. Emily typed a short reply. Emily, good. Keep it that way. She slid the phone back into her pocket. She wasn't returning to the shadows completely. She knew that now, but she wasn't stepping back into the spotlight either. She was choosing the middle ground where responsibility lived without spectacle. At 2:17 a.m., the hospital lights flickered briefly. Emily looked up immediately. Around her, others noticed too, then relaxed when the power stabilized. Emily didn't tense. She listened. Nothing followed. No vibrations. No wrongness in the air. She exhaled and returned to her work. Just before dawn, as the sky lightened to a pale gray beyond the windows, Sarah approached with 2 cups of coffee. I made it extra strong, she said. Emily accepted it. Smart. They stood side by side, watching the night give way to morning. You know, Sarah said carefully, people talk about you. Emily raised an eyebrow. I'm sure they do. Not like rumors, Sarah continued. More like reassurance. Like when things feel off, someone says, Emily's on tonight. And that's enough. Emily stared into her cup, throat tightening unexpectedly. That's not something you can teach, Sarah added. It's something you earn. Emily nodded once. So are scars. The shift ended without incident. As Emily gathered her things, she passed the trauma bay where it had all begun weeks earlier. The floor had been replaced, the walls repainted. No sign of what had happened unless you knew where to look. She paused there just for a moment. Not out of regret, out of acknowledgement. Outside the early morning, air was cool, the parking lot quiet. The city stretched awake in front of her, unaware and alive. Emily took off her badge, turned it over in her hand, then clipped it back on. She didn't need to choose between who she was and who she had been anymore. Both had a place, and as she walked to her car, blending once more into the ordinary world, one truth settled firmly in her chest. Some guardians don't stand on walls or wear medals. Some work the night shift. There's a powerful truth hidden in this story, and it reaches far beyond hospitals, uniforms, or moments of violence. The people who protect us the most are often the ones we never notice. In real life, strength doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't wear medals every day or demand recognition. Sometimes it shows up quietly, doing the job, holding the line, choosing restraint over ego and responsibility over praise. Emily didn't save lives because she wanted to be seen. She saved them because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't act. And that's the lesson. Your past does not disappear just because you change paths. What you've learned, discipline, courage, empathy, resilience, will follow you. The real question is how you choose to use it. Power without conscience creates monsters. Skill without humility destroys trust. But when strength is guided by compassion, it becomes protection, not domination. You may never face armed men in a hospital hallway, but every day you'll face moments where you can step up or step back, speak or stay silent, protect what's right, or let fear decide for you. Quiet courage matters, and it counts more than applause ever will. Now we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you the most and why? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters here. If you're drawn to stories about hidden strength, moral choices, and justice done quietly but firmly, make sure to subscribe and join this growing community. More powerful stories are coming, and we're glad you're here.